I am Dr. Sophie Vigneron, Senior Lecturer at the Kent Law School and Co-Director of the Center for Heritage at Kent. I'm going to present my research on cultural heritage law. I would like first to discuss the notion of heritage, or what is heritage. Then I will briefly introduce cultural heritage law, and finally I will present a critical approach to cultural heritage law. So what is cultural heritage? The word heritage is multifaceted. It is a literal translation of the French word héritage, which means inheritance. This original narrow legal sense of inheritance or inherited goods has widened to include all objects, places, and practices such as songs, dances, or rituals that are culturally significant for an individual, a community, or a state, and that are transmitted from one generation to the next. It also implies individual or collective cultural identities and memories, linking past and present, thus contributing to nation building and statehood. Initially in England, cultural heritage was referred to as ancient monument, sites, or works of art. For example, the Ancient Monument Act of 1882, or currently the Ancient Monument and Archaeological Areas Act of 1979. The notion of national heritage was used relatively late, in the mid-20th century. During parliamentary debate of the Ancient Monument and Archaeological Areas Act of 1979, the words monuments and heritage were used as synonymous. Likewise, the expression cultural heritage was very rare until the 1980s. For example, in 1982, a report written for UNESCO mentioned the use of the expression cultural heritage, but noted that it was more traditional to use the word national heritage or patrimony. Today, it is widely used. For example, between the days of the 8th and the 11th of September 2016, there were Heritage Open Days in England, and a heritage festival to celebrate England history, architecture, and culture. Or we can also look at the Campaign for Real Ale that has developed a national inventory of heritage pubs and regional inventories of pub interiors worthy of protection. It shows that cultural heritage covers everything from cathedrals to pubs, Morris dancing, painting, objects, and everything else. But what is essential is that cultural heritage emphasizes the shared past of a nation or of all human beings, as it includes natural resources as well as oral traditions, tribal knowledge, its memory, and its identity. It emphasizes the commonality of the heritage and the common duty of all states to protect and preserve the treasures falling under this category in the interest of the world community as a whole. It has become both an emotional and political connection to a culture, as illustrated by the destruction of the Buddha of Banyan, which was a political act of annihilation of an alien and offending past. Similarly, the bombing of Dubrovnik during the war in ex-Yugoslavia was a political act since the town, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, was demilitarized. As we have seen more recently, the destruction of heritage in Mali, Syria, and Iraq was made with the intent to destroy an offending past. However, the destruction both negates the monument but emphasizes its value as heritage. It negates it because it creates a void, but this void, this emptiness, emphasizes its importance for the history of humanity. So what is cultural heritage law? Cultural heritage law has developed in the last 50 years, and it is the law that aims to regulate the cultural heritage. As we have just seen, heritage is a broad concept, so consequently, the field of cultural heritage law is very broad. Cultural heritage law is the body of legal norms and regulations, both national and international, that regulates the cultural heritage. Cultural heritage law overlaps substantially with international public law, international private law, criminal law, contract law, and tort law, amongst other laws. So cultural heritage law looks at the different categories of heritage and the protection that they need. There are special regulations applying to the different categories of heritage that will overlap, such as museum regulations for antiquities and works of art, or in the category of immovable, planning control, scheduled monuments, and also excavations of sites of archaeological interests. So we have a division by category, but we also have a division by the levels of protection: international, regional, national, international. For example, at the international level, there are 6 important conventions that have been adopted under the aegis of the UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization. The first convention was adopted in 1954 after World War II in order to protect cultural property in the event of armed conflict. The second convention of 1970 is the convention that aims to prohibit the trafficking of cultural property, of cultural objects. In 1972, the UNESCO most famous and mostly ratified convention is the World Heritage Convention, or the Convention concerning the protection of the world's cultural and natural heritage. In 2001, the Convention on the Protection of the Underwater Cultural Heritage was adopted. In 2003, the Convention for the Safeguarding of the Intangible Cultural Heritage, and in 2005, the Convention on the Protection and Promotion of the Diversity of Cultural Expressions. And we see here in the last 2 conventions that were adopted under the aegis of UNESCO in 2003 and 2005, the widening definition of heritage as not only objects and monuments or places, but also as the importance of the intangible heritage of practices, cultural practices. For example, French food is registered on the list of intangible practices that deserve protection. The French way of eating evening meals or eating meals is protected under this convention, if it needed to. But each convention was adopted to answer a specific problem at the time that it was adopted. They are designed to be self-contained and independent, but also designed according to a similar form with the same aim: protect the cultural heritage. And to those international conventions, we also find regional conventions at the European level. For example, we have convention adopted by the Council for Europe. We also have regulations and directives adopted by the European Union. The 2 are different. There are also regional conventions that only apply in Africa or in Asia or in the Americas. We then have national laws, and finally we have intra-national laws, which means laws that are adopted, for example, by federal states. So we have here a complex web of rules and regulations that might contradict each other. So one of the points of a critical approach to cultural heritage law is to bring consistency to those different regulations and rules, to bring order to those different rules, to understand the different principles or the underlying principles of the rules that have been adopted or the conventions that have been adopted. And we find here some core principles of cultural heritage law. For example, the obligation to respect cultural property in the event of armed conflict, and the obligation to abstain from appropriating and transferring cultural property within military occupied territories, and the corresponding obligation of restitution. And those 2 principles are very important in the current conflicts that are taking place in the Middle East and in some African countries. For example, it is widely known, and it has been advertised widely as well, that ISIS or Daesh is currently illicitly excavating antiquities from the zones that it is occupying. And those antiquities then find their ways to Lebanon and London or other marketplaces, Paris, Geneva, Berlin, New York, and they are being sold. It means that the heritage of the people, the Syrian people, is currently being depleted by traffickers, but also by people who are buying those objects. So it is necessary to look at the law, what is it doing and what it is not doing, and to reinforce the importance of the protection of cultural heritage for the people as a whole. We find other principles, such as the principle of cooperation in time of peace for the prevention and remediation of the illicit traffic of movable cultural property, the respect for national laws protecting cultural property, the respect for cultural diversity and the protection of living cultures, sustainable development, intergenerational equity, and the duty of the current generation to safeguard the cultural and natural wealth of the world. We today have the duty to protect our heritage wherever it is. So, a critical approach to this principle is also looking at who does benefit from the trafficking, but also who does benefit from the protection of heritage, and who also defines what is heritage, because by defining what heritage is, we also apply a category of laws that will protect the heritage. So it is very important to question those laws, to question the process of identifying heritage in order to better protect heritage for us and for our children. Thank you all for listening.